Welcome into the Your Illini Nation pregame show here on a beautiful Memorial Stadium morning. I'm Courtney Layne Brewer, joined by Joey Wagner here as the Illini are set to take on Minnesota. Joey, I think I asked you about a similar game the last time you and I did the pregame show as a new member of the Illini team. What does this series mean, and what are some of the history of this?
I think Brett Bielema and PJ Fleck are very similar in terms of how they want to build their teams. Now, their approaches in front of a camera and behind a microphone are much different. PJ is very animated, very energetic, but the way they want to build in the trenches, solid defense, those two things are really overlap. So I don't know as much about the series. It's not, it's not a protected rivalry. It's not any of that, but the way those two go about things, there's so much there. And Brett Bielema recognizes that, even though he said on Monday, yeah, there are some differences. I say that every time, but the foundation of what they want to be is very Big Ten Wesky and very much in line with one another.
Right, gotcha. It's a big one today. Number 24, Illinois, bowl eligible, which is a sigh of relief for fans, but still fighting to get to that maybe a little bit better of a bowl, maybe a holiday bowl, something in that vein. What's at stake for this team today?
Yeah, it's a chance, one, to get to that 9-win, 10-win mark if they can do it. And obviously running the table for the rest of the regular season would get them to 10. But the Cheez-It Bowl, for instance, has been around here a little bit the last three home games. That's the citrus,
Cheez-Its.
Yes, that'd be great. The snack mix. So that's like the Cheez-It. I think it's Fiesta Bowl. Well, something they rename them all the time, but that's a big one, right? That's one of those New Year Day bowls, and you get someone to watch you 3 times, you become more attractive to that bowl. So it's a chance to have one of the better seasons and at least recent history, and 10-win seasons don't come around very often here, and that's still very much on the table. And college football playoffs are probably a pipe dream. They probably always were a pipe dream. I know the argument would be, well, you've lost to 1-3. Let's slow down on that. I don't think that's really going on here, but you can establish yourself as, okay, Brett Bielema has 8+ wins in 2 of the last 3 years. They've got a chance to go to another big bowl. Their fan base would really line up pretty heavily for that. There's still a lot there left for this team to do and to erase. I think a big storyline with this, Courtney, is in 2022, they sat in a very similar position. They were 7-1. In that year, they could have clinched the West. They could have gone to Indianapolis, but they lost at home to Purdue and to Michigan State, and that took that chance away. So you want to close better, right? Because that season had 9-win potential, and they couldn't get it done down the stretch. So I think that's there. T.Y. Edwards brought that up this week. Brett Bielema's kind of slowed down on that talk a little bit, but just closing strong is a big deal for this team.
Well, in this new world of availability reports in college football, I was prepared to hop on here with you this morning and hopefully break the news about whether or not we'd have Pat Bryant, Torrey Cox, Caleb Patterson, but Coach B stole our thunder last night, tweeting out that they're ready to go. I mean, what does that add, even just from an atmosphere standpoint? Because I think I speak for a lot of fans in saying I was nervous about Pat.
Well, first of all, shout out to Brett Bielema for saving us some work this morning.
So
and putting that. I think he did that. Like a lot of people, I saw one why is he putting this out there now? Because he was very muted about it on Thursday. Minnesota, I think, had landed in town already. Last-minute changes, as we saw with Illinois against Purdue. It's not easy to do, Courtney. So I think you factor in that. And I think the excitement of Pat Bryant playing a football game, that probably, if you can get 100 more tickets out of that, right? Like that's worth it when you feel like they've got a chance. But on the field, it's a big deal for Pat Bryant. I mean, he's an incredibly good football player. He's he's an all Big Ten guy. He's going to be a draft pick. He's got 7 touchdown receptions. But just the way that he and Zachary Franklin opposite each other on the outside, it puts safeties in a bind. Who do you kind of shade towards one way or the other? Most teams don't have 2 shut-down cornerbacks to answer for both of those guys. So if you take Pat Bryant out of the mix, you need Malik Elzy to step into a role that he's not had to step into yet. For Alex Kapka-Jones to step into a role that he hasn't had to yet. Maybe Colin Dixon slides outside and Hank Beatty plays in the slot. But now you just go with what you know. There's obviously a connection with Luke Altmaier, with Pat Bryant. His availability is to me, was the biggest storyline coming into this week. I know the defensive backs play a role in that. We can get into that in a second. But him being able to play gives Illinois a much better chance against a Minnesota team that's playing really well. They've won 3 in a row. The pass defense has been really good. The run defense, we can get into that, leaves some space for Illinois in a suddenly found running game. But, man, Pat Bryant back's a big deal.
Yeah. And then Torrey Cox. I mean, what does that add, especially in a Minnesota team that runs the ball like they do?
Yeah, well, Torrey Cox and Caleb Patterson,
Yes.
your two starting outside cornerbacks, both of them play physically. Torrey Cox obviously undersized, but that's not been a big storyline with him this season. He's played pretty well given he's undersized. Minnesota is really, they're not explosive. They're not going to Oregon you, right?
Right.
But
well, no one's going to Oregon you.
No one's going to. Very few teams are going to Oregon you, but they're not a team like. They are going to have some longer drives, barring a coverage bust. And having your two corners out there who you don't feel like have busted often. There's been moments where, you think back to Purdue, Torrey Cox, I believe, got burned on a double route. Like, it happens. That's life of a cornerback. But to have that stability with those guys back there, that's a big deal. Terrence Brooks will not play today. So is that a Jaheim Clark? Does he step into a bigger role? Tyson Rooks could be a guy. Tyler Strain's questionable. He'd be another nickel option. But you don't want to have to get into your fourth and your fifth options at corner in the Big Ten. And that's been the story with Illinois. As you get into November, do you have the depth to weather some of those injuries? And they've largely avoided the injury bug outside of Caden Fagan. So having those guys back, you want to be at full strength against a Minnesota offense that's coming into its own and an accurate quarterback.
Absolutely. You mentioned Tyson Rooks. I mean, talk about a guy who has just seen one of these in the last couple of weeks. Really showed out against Oregon. Do you think we can see anything similar from him? I almost said tonight. Nope, it is
it's middle of the day. Tyson Rooks is interesting. He came in at he kind of profiles. He's long, he's tall. It's maybe a safety, that middle of the field, the way Miles Scott plays now. They had him at cornerback, and then they moved him to wide receiver last season, and really throughout a lot of training camp and pushing into that Eastern Illinois game. Got him back to defensive back. He's playing in that nickel role, which, again, not always what you think of. You think of maybe a little quicker, smaller guys in that nickel role. That's where he plays in this defense. If Tyler Strain doesn't go, maybe, right? But I think you'd have to see a number of injuries kind of happen there with Xavier Scott moving outside if one of those other two outside corners couldn't go, which would open the door for Tyson Rooks. But he had a moment in Oregon, and he made the most of it. And I thought, really, the pick was a good play, right? But the way he was able to return that and kind of flip the field a little bit, he's a really athletic kid. He has a tennis background.
Oh, wow.
He's got a whole deal. He was kind of new to football when he got
I would love to see the Venn diagram of kids who play tennis and kids who
I would
play
not
football.
Assume it's I think the wrestling Venn diagram might be
big.
a little bit bigger there. But, he had a really good moment at Oregon. He's an intriguing guy, but I think to see him out there today would probably require some reshuffling, probably by way of injury.
Yeah. Let's get into the scouting report. If you're just joining us, number 24, Illinois, hosting the 5-3 Minnesota Golden Gophers. They've got a transfer at QB, much like this team. Max Brosmer with 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He threw for 4 touchdowns against Maryland. What have you seen in this kid?
Yeah, a little bit of an acclimation process. He's a New Hampshire transfer coming up to Minnesota. Minnesota's last season's quarterback, Ethan Calic McManus, is now at Rutgers. Illinois will see him later. This was an upgrade for Minnesota at quarterback. Brosmer is accurate again. Not a guy who's going to launch it all over the place, all down the field, but he can complete in the neighborhood of 68% of his passes last week. He's in command of this offense. PJ Flex teams, you go back a couple of years, the quarter Tanner Morgan isn't a guy who's got the biggest arm, but they execute what they do really, really well. And going to get Brosmer, he stepped into this and is starting to figure out the Big Ten here. So what's Illinois do, right, with a team that's not going to try to be explosive? So do you feel comfortable if you're Aaron Henry? I thought it was a really tough performance for Aaron Henry in that defense last week at Oregon, especially in the first half. Do you try to run more man coverage and get some pressure on Brosmer? Can you make him uncomfortable where he's not completing 66, 67, 68% of his passes? Can you try to just throw him off schedule a little bit? That's such a fascinating storyline here, especially with your cornerbacks healthy. Can those guys hold their own to get Gabe Akis, to get Dylan Rosiak, Seth Coleman, getting after the quarterback, and just maybe no more three-man rushes with Coleman and Akis both dropping into coverage? I understand the logic. Aaron Henry, to his credit, explained it very well on Monday. Like a lot of people rightfully say, well, it doesn't make sense to me. But your best defense right now is Gabe Akis, who's playing at a high level. We get into the matchup with him and Ariante Ursary here in a second. Getting after the quarterback and putting pressure and trying to – you need those outside linebackers to make game-changing plays. That's what you need right now. You're not – maybe that'll force some errant throws that you can pick off in the secondary, but sacks, getting there, shutting down, getting in Brosmer's head is a big deal.
Yeah. Tell me about this Akis matchup.
Yeah, Ariante Ursary is a left tackle for Minnesota. He's projected first-round pick Gabe Akis has played really, really well here lately. Obviously, the Michigan game rightfully gets plenty of attention. He had a sack at Oregon last week. Brett Bielema took Gabe Akis to media days in Indianapolis and said, hey, we brought him because we don't usually bring juniors, but I'm not sure that he's going to be here next year. And you thought, oh, that's very lofty. Obviously, you've seen flashes of Gabe Akis and that immense potential, but he's starting to really put it together here. And Ursery is a good challenge. I mean, a projected first-round pick, he's probably seen a couple of those in his time here at Illinois. But I said, Gabe, I asked him this week about that matchup, and he said, scouts are watching him.
Right.
And if they're watching him, they're watching Gabe Akis in this matchup. So it's a really good opportunity for him to keep elevating his draft stock. I'm sure Illinois fans, maybe some in the building, would love to see him get drafted high, but maybe you'd like to put him in a position where you could work him to come back for another year, which certainly is still on the table for Illinois. But he'll primarily, I would imagine, be on Ursery. It's Seth Coleman to be a guy who could get over there as well.
Something I'm really intrigued by in my scouting report of this is Darius Taylor, 7 touchdowns for 513 yards. We saw Illinois essentially evaporate Michigan's run game 2 weeks ago. Is that something that they can replicate, or was that more on Michigan trying to do something different?
That was probably more on Michigan. Jack Tuttle, who has since retired, he's had, I think he said 5 concussions now in his college career.
Yeah,
he really struggled in that game, and you were able to say, all right, if you can beat us through the air, hat tip, we don't believe you can. And Michigan obviously could not. So you could load the box and really stop that Michigan run game. Minnesota's not going to allow for that. Brosmer's too accurate. Daniel Jackson is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the Big Ten. Very Pat Bryant-like, very Zachary Franklin-like, savvy route runner. I mean, just not the most athletic guy, not the fastest guy you'll ever see, but he is just a very productive, very smart wide receiver. So if you try to sell out on Darius Taylor, who was really in line to win the Big Ten Freshman of the Year last year, he got hurt. The door opened for Caden Fagan. He got hurt, and the award goes to Purdue. Taylor had a really good freshman year. He's had a good sophomore year now. But, yeah, I think this Minnesota offense is just too balanced for you to sell out completely on Taylor, and Jackson's a huge reason for that.
With Minnesota catching interceptions the way they have been this season, they're at 13. Is that an area of concern for Illinois? Are you going to be leaning more on your running backs? I know the answer, but
it is a concern because I don't think Luke Altmaier's played his best game. Last week, he missed open receivers, obviously the 2 interceptions. The first one was just a really good play by Oregon to trick him and what he saw coverage-wise, and the throw really wasn't particularly close to his intended target anyway. The second one, another good play. Probably could have put a little more on that ball, but you haven't seen 2 interception games from Luke Altmaier much this season. I think he really needs to have that game where he gets his feet back under him. You can go back to the Michigan game and say, well, the stats weren't there. What was asked of him was very different in that Michigan game. There wasn't a need for him to throw it all over the yard. And now at the same time, 80 passing yards is still 80 passing yards, and that's not moving the needle for many people if you're just looking at box scores. But yeah, Coy Parrish, freshman safety for Minnesota, top 100 kid, stayed home for the Gophers. He has been really, really impressive, and he's a guy who gets a lot of those interceptions. So Luke Altmaier is going to have to take care of the football because the margins in this game in particular, and really in a lot of games that Illinois plays, Courtney, as we've seen, they're very thin, right? And turnovers like that give Minnesota that juice to go down there and do. Illinois probably, in fact, has to force a turnover or two really in this game. But yeah, that Altmaier needs to take a step forward, needs to protect the ball. And the running game, Minnesota, you don't usually think of Minnesota as a team that has struggled at times to stop the run, but this not really been the strength of the Minnesota defense. And Illinois' run game has a little bit incrementally looked better over the last 3 weeks without Caden Fagan, combination of Josh McCray, Aiden Lawfrey, Luke Altmaier. If you factor in stats for 100th time, quit counting sacks as negative rushing yards. It's mind-boggling.
Tell him.
It drives me insane. But if you look at, you kind of just take out the negative yards, and for the most part, those have all been sacks for Luke Altmaier. Illinois in the last 3 games is averaging 5.3 yards of rush. Obviously, with sacks, that number drops to about 4.5, and sacks obviously have been a big deal for this offensive line. But that's starting to come around a little bit, and Aiden Lawfrey looks like he's starting to get his feet under him, back healthy again. I know he's dinged up a little bit early in the season. Josh McCray's running hard. I'll be curious if we see Khalil Valentine today, but there could be an opportunity on the ground for Illinois.
Yeah, well, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. From the run game, who do you expect to see have a big game today, and who do you want to see have a big game today?
I think pick an answer either way for Aiden Lawfrey and Josh McCray. I think I picked Josh McCray as our like pick to click. I just feel like you've seen it with him a little bit more. He's kind of in that Caden Fagan don't lose yards mode right now. Even if it's falling forward for 2, it's very minimal. It's kind of hidden yards. Those things turn up over the course of time. And I think he's been a good threat out of the backfield. Aiden Lawfrey looks like he's getting closer to popping one. And I don't know how many yards that's going to be. It might be a 40-yard run. It might be a 30-yard run. Where you can see it start to build with him. And I'm curious if he has a moment today where he's able to get out into space and use that speed. Courtney, we've heard about Aiden Lawfrey's speed since he was at Gibson City.
Right.
And it's real. I mean, you look at his track numbers, that speed is real. And in the offseason, he started to turn that into football speed, which is confidence, understanding what this offense is trying to accomplish. It just feels like it's time to see that really burst, really pop on the field. And today could be an opportunity. Certainly in one of the 3 after today, that'll pop up as well.
Sure. I'm really hoping to see more from Khalil Valentine. I always have a soft spot in my heart for the young kids. And to have seen him I can see it clear as day. He had a run right here that he wanted to end in the end zone, and it didn't. And to see that drive from a kid, I'm really impressed by. So he's my want to see this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a guy who, like Aiden Lawfrey, shifty, can get out into space, has an element of speed that Jordan Anderson, Josh McCray really don't have right now. The problem with him that we've seen pop up here, and it's not just a him problem, it's a freshman running back problem. Run block or pass protecting is a big part. Josh McCray is a good pass protector. Caden Fagan was a really good pass protector. You've just not seen that fully with Khalil Valentine. He's small, right? I mean, that's a big offseason for him to add more weight. But if you can find some moments for him to let him try to get out with that speed, he's a guy that you want to see a freshman have a moment.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's cool when you have that, and it'd be a good chance to talk with Khalil Valentine
that too.
about that moment. But yeah, it was interesting to see him at Oregon. I didn't know what we were going to see with the pass protecting issues he's had. So he's kind of a wild card in that bunch.
Yep. In doing also my research for this game, you'll remember I got here right before basketball, so I haven't lived Illinois football really. So my experience in the orange and blue is basketball. When I was doing my research for this game, and I'm looking at Brett Bielema versus the Minnesota. I gave away what I'm going to say. Looking at Brett Bielema versus the Minnesota Golden Gophers, it's giving Brad Underwood versus Juwan Howard. He has just had their number in 10 matches now. Does that play a factor?
I mean, it's a good question. I think some of those probably came against PJ during his years when Wisconsin was really, really rolling up there. But you go back to 2021, that was 5-7 season for Illinois. They beat Minnesota here. 21. They beat Minnesota on the road in that game. Sidney Brown really had a coming out party in that game. 2022, they beat him here. And that you expected, right? The way that 2022 season was going. 2023, John Paddock, game, right?
Hello, hi, nice to meet you.
Comes in and gets a big win on the road. So I don't know if it's just a matter, the Wisconsin carries a lot of weight on that 10-0 record for Brett Bielema against Minnesota. But he's got a process for how he's building things, and that's played well against Minnesota. This is probably the tougher of the matchups for his time here at Illinois, but I think obviously with Pat Bryant healthy, with those defensive back healthy, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, and what about these guys? Do they have Minnesota's number, having won against them? Take a guy like Pat Bryant. He's beat him 3 times.
You think, it doesn't hurt, right?
No.
I mean, it's a lot better than, going into the Purdue game and the whole story. They can't get the cannon back. They can't beat these guys. So you'd rather be having not lost to Minnesota than trying to sneak in a win here or there. So, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. If you're still joining us, Joey Wagner with the Illini Inquirer here for the WCIA Your Line Nation pregame show. Illinois hosting Minnesota this morning at Memorial Stadium. Another one for you, as someone who has not been here. It's cold. Early, cold,
perfect fall
game.
Day. It's
Does
cold.
that affect how full this place is going to get, especially when we've seen it be overpacked this year?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the weather because it's going to end up being a really nice fall day here by the time kickoff rolls around and in that first quarter. 11 a.m. kicks are tough, Courtney. The 2:30 is an ideal time for people to go tailgate, have a few, make some food, come in here. Obviously, night games, we've seen really good atmospheres here. 11 is probably the bigger deal than the weather. And I think a lot of some people in Illinois have been clamoring for a little bit of a more fall feel. It was a little warm, I guess, by October standards for some of those other home games.
Illinois hosting the Minnesota Golden Gophers. They're on a 3-game win streak with wins over both new West Coast teams and Maryland. How much of that 3-game win streak is them getting hot, and how much of that 3-game win streak is this is how your schedule fell?
Yeah, some of it's definitely the schedule. UCLA is not very good. Maryland increasingly looks not very good. I think that win over USC was really good. I mean, that's a heck of a win for Minnesota. I know USC has had its own acclimation process, Courtney, to the Big Ten. But that's still USC with Miller Moss at quarterback, Lincoln Riley as their head coach. That was a good win. And that's, if you sub out USC for Rutgers in that stretch, right, then you could really look at it and say, okay, well, hey, listen, those aren't 3 very good teams. The USC makes you at least think about it. I do think, obviously, seeing UCLA, seeing Maryland, but they dominated Maryland. That was a thorough domination. So that's when you do that in the Big Ten, you've got to look and say, okay, something's going right. Regardless of the opponent, something is going right for Minnesota to win as convincingly as it did against Maryland. But it's the schedule, I think, does help boost that 3-0 a little bit.
On the topic of schedule, we've heard Coach Whelan talk about it since the preseason. The 5-break, 4-break, 3 really
Brett
played
Bielema
in
loves
Illinois'
planning.
favor.
He loves planning.
He is just like me for real. He went on his rant a couple weeks ago about how he was like putting up a picture of an airplane on the projector screen and saying, this is a plane. We're going to get on a plane. I really appreciate it from Coach. But all that to say, heading into a bye week for this team, sandwiched in between a really tough loss, what kind of impact does that have here?
I think it's just a chance. One, that's why was a little curious about the injuries, because it's like you could give them 2 weeks.
Yes.
But obviously it's a huge game for Illinois and a chance to really get back on track. That's what it is. You don't want to go into the bye week, Courtney, having lost as convincingly as you did at Oregon. And I get it, it's Oregon, but you don't go to that game anticipating you'll be blown out. And they were blown out of that game. But then you don't want to lose at home for the first time this season against Minnesota. That could linger, right? And then suddenly those 2022 feelings that Brett Bielema has been trying to push away, and there wasn't a lot of guys on this team who were playing on that team or really on that roster, but you don't want that to start to creep back in and to make it think that it's a possibility. So getting out of this, winning this game, staying unbeaten at home, going into the bye weeks, kind of feeling yourself a little bit. And if you're the coaches, going into the bye week and high schools, junior colleges, with, hey, guess what? We're 7-2. Those 2 losses, number 1 and number 3. Yeah. Don't fault us for that, right? Like that gives you a little more power on the recruiting trail for the coaches and the players. You should go in a little more confidence. Then you get to a really winnable 3-game stretch in this year.
Right. Well, that was something I wanted to ask you as someone who covers recruiting a little more than I do going into the bye week for these coaches. Are there any big targets that people should be refreshing your Twitter feed for?
Well, I think they're still on flip watch for some guys. Obviously, they hosted Colorado commit Alex Graham, Michigan USC still involved in that one. I'll be curious to see where that finish line ends with him. But I think a lot of this is now you want to go keep selling this vision. They've probably dialed it down to 3-4 more high school guys.
Right.
You want to have obviously a good pitch in the portal. I'm assuming they'll try to just look around some junior colleges, especially in the trenches. That seems to be an area that they've found some room to work there. Then you want to start with these 26 kids again, not start with them. Continue to push those relationships that you've built, and you pop in and you see a J.C. Anderson in Mount Zion, you see a Max Sutter in Dunlap, and you really continue to say, guys, we're 7-2 here. Look at this back stretch. Like, we can do this. And that I think is the big deal, is to continue pushing those 26 kids. Make sure you have those 25 secured. I don't find anything to be concerned about there. And maybe flip a couple of guys if you can swing it.
As we wrap up, any predictions for this game, Illinois, and an early one heading into the bye week before one last stretch of 3 games to seal your fate?
It's tough because I don't know that Illinois is going to win out, but I picked them to win this game. Just because I feel like this is kind of that Altmaier moment where he knows last week wasn't as good as he's played. And he's got a better quarterback. And in toss-up games, margin games like this, give me the team with the better quarterback. And that's no disrespect to Max Brosmer. Luke Altmaier's just really elevated his play last week, notwithstanding this season. And special teams quietly, Courtney, Illinois has been really good. I know that onside kick just kind of lingers with a lot of people, and it showed that was a mistake that nearly cost them the game against Purdue. But that has been a good unit. And when you're talking about games that are one-possession games, 1-point game, 3-point game, special teams, your David Alanos, your Hugh Robertsons, Jaheim Clark, Tanner Heckles, your gunners on punt, those guys find a way to make a play that can shift the game a little bit. So I think it'll be Illinois narrowly. By 3 points, yeah.
I have to agree with you. I felt that it would be Illinois narrowly going into this game, but knowing that Pat Bryant is healthy gave me all the more assurance about how this team can come out and perform today. I agree with you. This could be a really big game for Luke, especially for Luke to show some of his versatility. You're going to have to run the ball against a Minnesota team like this. You can show his versatility in that area, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing all of them in action. Joey, what can folks see over on the Illini Inquirer if they want to hear a little more about this game with 57 minutes and 21 seconds?
Well, yeah, we'll have a quick hits post-game podcast. Jeremy and I will have notebooks, takeaways, stories coming out of this game. Obviously, we have content from the women's basketball exhibition last night and a win over Lewis. Recruiting news always coming this way, especially as it gets into flip watch season, Courtney, for some of these possible top-of-class guys that Illinois is pushing for in 2025.
Yeah. One sentence on the exhibition last night.
Work in progress.
One sentence on Illinois men's basketball's opener against Eastern Illinois on Monday.
Take care of business. That's probably not even the right kind of assert. Be dominant. I think that's what you need to do. That exhibition maybe had some people saying like, oh, and then reminded people this is a young team that's still trying to figure each other out. Eastern is a chance to come in there and really say, yeah, we're young. Yeah. We have a ton of talent, and that's going to win over at the end of the day.
Well, it is that time of the year with both basketball and football going on, but we're here ready for a big game as number 24 Illinois hosts Minnesota. For Joey Wagner of the Illini Inquirer, I'm Courtney Layne Brewer. We'll also have our post-game podcast as well as remarks from Brett Bielema and a recap of the game on WCIA.com and tonight at 10 o'clock on WCIA. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.